Hey guys, what's up? My name is Brian Olivas. We're here at the Epoxy Resin store, and today we're going to show you a tutorial on how to pour a huge river table. So here we're bringing in the wood to build our form. Our table is going to be a 6 by 6 foot table. So our form was going to be 6 feet 6 inches to give us a little room to play with. So we're going to cut our wood down to the dimensions that we need. And we're going to connect both of the boards with some 2x4s underneath to make them one solid piece. Now we're going to cover our entire base of the mold with Tyvek tape. Make sure to overlap each row of tape by 1/8 of an inch so you have no leaks. Also, you're going to put the walls up, also covered in Tyvek tape. And if you have any splits in the wood, you put a little piece of wood behind it to connect those as well, just like we did the bottom of the mold. And once the mold is finished, we are going to add some silicone to seal all the edges. Take your time in this process to make sure you have no leaks. You don't want to lose or waste any of your product. And you can even seal the outside of the edges just to make sure you're not going to have any leaks on your mold. Then you're going to measure and cut your wood to fit into the mold. And here we're dry fitting the wood to make sure it fits in there. So after we cut our wood and dry fit it in the mold, we clamp it down so the wood doesn't float when we pour our epoxy. After a little bit of thinking on this one, since the edges of the epoxy were going to be so long, we decided to add rebar for some extra strength. And then we began to mix our epoxy and we got ready for our first pour. Normally you can pour up to 2 inches thick with this epoxy, but the volume was so high that we decided to do multiple layers. And we waited 48 hours before the next layer, so we did sand it to get a mechanical bond. And if you do any kind of sanding, you want to make sure that the surface is completely clean before you do your next pour. You don't want to have any debris or dust floating in your next pour. So after we got done cleaning, we did our second pour. And during this pour, we took a paintbrush and we sealed all of our edges of the wood to prevent any air bubbles on the surface that we'll be doing on the future pours, and then more torching. Since we waited less than 24 hours on the next pour, we made sure it was tacky and we began our third pour, which we didn't have to sand because the epoxy was still not fully cured, so it will have a mechanical bond. And this is just us once again popping more bubbles. We had extra epoxy left over, so we decided to fill a bunch of cracks and knots. These will all have to be filled in eventually, so if you have a leftover epoxy, you can fill these in, and that way you're not wasting any product. And since this was a custom order table, we are going to add gold flake to the top layer of this table. We would cover our project with a Easy Up and plastic after each pour to keep dust, bugs, and any other debris out of it. After we did our final deep pour, our table was ready to demold. So we're taking off the walls and we're going to cut off the edges and square up the whole table. to the desired dimensions that the customer asked for. And then we're going to sand and make everything on the top as smooth as possible and get it ready for our top coats. Here we're mixing up our first top coat, and we're only going to pour it on the wood just to get the wood sealed. This will prevent any air bubbles on the future top coats. And take your time and make sure all the epoxy gets in every crevice and hole so you can prevent any air bubbles. The next day we brought in the legs to set the table on. And now we can continue to work on the table. Here we're using a router to round over all of our edges before we do our final flood coat. It can get very messy. And now we are mixing up super gloss to do our final top coat. And I like to use a notch trowel to let the material spread evenly. And then we do our final torching, and you have a beautiful top coat on your river table. After your final top coat is dry, your table is finished and ready to go to the customer. And this is our step-by-step process on how to build a river table. Thank you for watching.